Don't you dare touch my phone, Alicia, Jonathan snapped, snatching his device from the nightstand before I could even reach for it. I stood frozen, the beautiful gift box containing his $5,000 birthday watch still in my other hand. I was just turning off your alarm so you could sleep in on your birthday, I said, trying to hide the hurt in my voice. Here, I got you something. Jonathan took the box without even looking up from his screen, mumbling a half-hearted thanks as he carelessly set it aside without opening it. My heart sank. I'd saved for months for that watch, cutting back on lunches and coffees to afford the luxury brand he'd been eyeing. My name is Alicia Morrison. I'm 25 years old, and this was the moment I realized my 2-year marriage might be beyond saving. Not because of the phone, though his defensiveness was suspicious, but because of the growing indifference that had settled between us like a wall of ice. Jonathan hadn't always been this way. When we met at a tech conference 3 years ago, he was attentive, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. As an IT security specialist, I was used to men either intimidated by my technical knowledge or trying to mansplain my own field to me. Jonathan, a marketing executive for a software company, had been refreshingly different. But something had changed in the last few months. He worked later, checked his phone constantly, and grew irritable when I asked even innocent questions about his day. I told myself it was stress from his upcoming performance review, the one that might finally bring the promotion he'd been chasing. That evening, as Jonathan showered, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Kate. "I need to show you something. Don't freak out," her message read, followed by a screenshot that made my stomach drop. It was Jonathan's profile on a dating app, using a photo I'd taken of him just 3 weeks earlier on our weekend getaway to San Antonio. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Successful professional seeking meaningful connection. Newly single and ready to explore what life has to offer. Newly single? We'd celebrated our anniversary just last month. I heard the shower turn off. Taking a deep breath, I deleted the message and placed my phone face down. When Jonathan emerged from the bathroom, I smiled as if nothing was wrong, even as I felt something hardening inside me. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. And then I would make sure he regretted ever underestimating me. I'd always been practical and methodical, traits that made me good at my job uncovering security vulnerabilities. As the days passed, I maintained a perfect facade while quietly observing Jonathan's behavior like a case study. That $5,000 watch, which represented nearly all of my personal savings, remained unopened on his dresser. When I casually asked if he liked it, he mumbled something about saving it for special occasions without even remembering what brand it was. My mind flashed back to our early days, how we'd stay up all night talking about our dreams, how he'd bring me coffee in bed and listen intently as I explained the technical aspects of my work. I remembered our wedding day, when he'd looked at me with such devotion that I thought nothing could ever come between us. What had happened to that man? Had he ever existed? Or had I simply projected my hopes onto someone who never truly saw me? While Jonathan was at work, I checked his laptop, an action that would have once seemed unthinkable to me. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Though he'd cleared his browser history, he'd forgotten about the automatic backup syncing to our shared cloud storage. Amateur mistake. I found more dating apps, secret email accounts, and evidence of at least 3 active conversations with different women. In one particularly painful exchange, he described me as boring and too focused on her career. When asked why he didn't just leave, he'd written, "financial reasons." Once I get this promotion, I'll have the cushion I need. So that was it. He was using me, waiting until his career advancement before discarding me. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath my pain, something else emerged. Cold, calculating anger. I considered confronting him immediately, but quickly dismissed the idea. A direct confrontation would only lead to denials and possibly him accelerating his plans. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to understand exactly what he was planning and gather irrefutable evidence. That night, as we ate dinner in silence, broken only by the occasional ping of his phone, an idea began to form. Jonathan didn't just need to be caught, he needed to experience the full weight of his betrayal. He needed to understand exactly what he was throwing away. "Everything okay with your food?" I asked sweetly, watching him text under the table. "Hmm? Yeah, fine," he replied without looking up. "Big project at work?" "Something like that." I nodded sympathetically. "You work so hard, you deserve that promotion." He glanced up briefly, surprised by my support. "Thanks, it's been stressful." "I know," I said, reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact but didn't squeeze back. "But things will get better soon. I'm sure of it." And they would, for me at least. Because I was about to make sure Jonathan learned a lesson he'd never forget. I excused myself after dinner, claiming I needed to finish a work project. Instead, I locked myself in our home office and began what I do best, creating a digital alter ego. If Jonathan was seeking connections online, I would give him exactly what he was looking for. First, I needed photographs. I couldn't risk using stock images that could be reverse searched, and using another real person's photos was both unethical and risky. Instead, I utilized cutting-edge AI image generation, carefully crafting a woman who would appeal to Jonathan without triggering his suspicions. Attractive but not model perfect. Professional yet approachable, with subtle elements of my own features subtly altered beyond recognition. I named her Victoria Lawson, 26, a digital marketing specialist, close enough to his field that they'd have common ground, but not so similar that their professional circles would overlap. I created detailed background information, a consistent personality profile, and even a fabricated work history at companies just outside his network. As I was putting the finishing touches on Victoria's dating profile, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Alicia, I'm heading to bed," Jonathan called, his voice lacking any real emotion. "Okay, I'll be there soon," I replied, quickly closing my laptop. When I joined him in our bedroom, he was already under the covers, scrolling through his phone. The $5,000 watch still sat untouched on his dresser, gathering dust. As I slipped into bed beside him, I felt sick at how we could be physically close yet emotionally miles apart. That night, as he fell asleep beside me, I lay awake planning my next steps. The promotion he was waiting for, the one that would give him the financial security to leave me, was scheduled to be announced in 6 weeks. My timeline was clear. The next morning, I launched Victoria's profile on the dating app where Jonathan was most active. Now I just had to wait and see if he'd take the bait. I didn't have to wait long. By lunchtime, Victoria had received several messages, including one from a familiar face, my husband. "Your profile stood out from the others," he wrote. "Something about your eyes seems familiar, like we've met before." A chill ran down my spine. Had I made the AI-generated image too similar to myself? But his follow-up message dispelled my concerns. "Maybe in another life? I'd love to get to know you in this one." I stared at his words, my finger hovering over the reply button. This was my moment to either walk away from this plan or commit fully. Behind me on my desk sat a framed photo from our wedding day, both of us beaming, full of hope and promises. Promises he'd broken without a second thought. I turned the frame face down and began to type. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria and Jonathan developed a rapport that made my stomach churn. Every morning, I'd watch him smile at his phone over breakfast, a smile he never directed at me anymore. Every night, I'd lie beside him, knowing he was messaging my alter ego when he thought I was asleep. "You're working late a lot," Jonathan commented one evening, not out of concern but seemingly annoyed that I wasn't maintaining our home to his standards. "Big security audit," I replied simply. In reality, I was in our spare bedroom, crafting Victoria's responses, carefully building a relationship with my own husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. As Victoria, I was everything Jonathan seemed to want: attentive, impressed by his career achievements, and sympathetic to his complaints. I mirrored his communication style, responded enthusiastically to his interests. and strategically shared insights about her life that would appeal to him. "It's amazing how much we have in common," he wrote to Victoria one night. "I haven't connected with someone like this in years." I felt a stab of pain reading those words. Just 3 years ago, he'd said almost the exact same thing to me when we first met. After 2 weeks of building rapport, Victoria finally asked the question, "Your profile says you're newly single, but sometimes I get the feeling there's more to the story. I've been hurt before, and just want to know what I'm getting into." His response came quickly. "I'm technically still married, but it's practically over. We've grown apart. She's always working and doesn't understand me anymore." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking with anger. So this was the narrative he'd constructed, that I was the distant, career-obsessed wife who'd driven him away. Not that he'd checked out of our marriage, ignored my attempts at connection, and started looking for my replacement while still enjoying the financial and domestic benefits of having a wife. "Why not just end it then?" Victoria asked. "Timing," he replied. "I'm up for a big promotion that should be announced in a month. Once that's secure, I can make my move. Starting over takes financial stability." He added, "I didn't plan on meeting someone like you in the meantime, but I'm glad I did." I closed my laptop, unable to read more. Our entire relationship had been reduced to a financial calculation, a stepping stone on his path to something better. The next day at work, I could barely focus. My colleague, Tina, noticed my distraction. "You okay?" "You've been staring at that same line of code for 20 minutes, she said, placing a cup of coffee on my desk. I hesitated before answering. Tina and I had become close over the past year, but I hadn't told anyone except Kate about Jonathan's betrayal or my plan. "Just dealing with some personal stuff," I said. Tina studied my face. "Alicia, I've known you long enough to tell when something's really wrong. Whatever it is, you don't have to handle it alone." Something in her kind expression cracked my resolve. I told her everything: the dating profile, the watch still sitting unopened, the fake identity I'd created, and Jonathan's admission that he was just waiting for his promotion before leaving me. When I finished, Tina was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What's your endgame here? Collect evidence for divorce?" I shook my head. That would be too easy. He doesn't just get to walk away on his terms. I want him to understand exactly what he's throwing away, and that I was always one step ahead of him. "That sounds like you have a plan," Tina said, leaning forward. I nodded slowly. "I do now." That evening, Victoria would suggest meeting in person, at Jonathan's favorite restaurant, on the exact day his promotion was to be announced. The day he thought would be the beginning of his new life would instead be the end of the life he knew. As I drove home, a notification appeared on my phone, a message from Jonathan to Victoria. "I can't wait to meet you. It feels like I've been waiting my whole life for someone who truly understands me." I smiled grimly at the road ahead. He had no idea what was coming. Over the next 3 weeks, I meticulously executed every phase of my plan. As Victoria, I deepened my connection with Jonathan, carefully gathering screenshots of every incriminating message. He revealed more than I expected, not just his dissatisfaction with our marriage, but detailed plans for his future without me. "Once this promotion comes through, I'll have enough saved to get my own place," he wrote. "I've already looked at a few apartments downtown." The betrayal cut deeper with each message. He'd been planning his exit for months, all while I'd been trying to save our marriage, working overtime to afford that $5,000 watch he couldn't be bothered to open. Meanwhile, I quietly prepared for my own future. I consulted with a divorce attorney, documenting our assets and separating our finances where possible. I compiled a dossier of evidence, not just the conversations with Victoria, but his other dating profiles and conversations I'd discovered. I wanted to be thoroughly prepared for when everything came to light. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Jonathan announced, "I need to work late on Thursday. Big presentation for the promotion." Thursday, the day Victoria had suggested they meet. I kept my expression neutral. "That's fine. Good luck with the presentation." He barely looked at me as he replied, "Thanks. It's important." "I know it is," I said quietly. Later that night, as Victoria, I confirmed their dinner plans at Bella Notte, his favorite Italian restaurant downtown. I suggested 7 p.m., knowing his presentation would conveniently end around 6:30. "I can't wait to finally meet you in person," he wrote. "It'll be a night to remember," I replied, and for once I wasn't lying. The following morning, I called Bella Notte and spoke with the manager, Antonio. I'd become friendly with him during the many anniversary and birthday dinners we'd celebrated there in happier times. "Antonio, I'd like to arrange something special," I explained, carefully outlining what I needed. His initial confusion gave way to understanding as I shared just enough of the situation. "I see," he said finally. "This is unusual, but we can accommodate your request, Mrs. Morrison." "Thank you. And one more thing. I'll need a table with a view of the entrance, but where I won't be immediately visible." With the restaurant arrangement settled, I turned to the final component of my plan. I needed something that would make the impact undeniable, something Jonathan couldn't dismiss or explain away. That's when I remembered the watch. For weeks it had sat untouched on his dresser, the ultimate symbol of his indifference. Now it would serve a different purpose. On Wednesday night, while Jonathan slept, I carefully retrieved the watch and its original packaging. I then drafted a note on our personal stationery, my hand steady despite the emotions churning inside me. Thursday arrived with a strange calm. I dressed carefully for work, applied my makeup with precision, and kissed Jonathan goodbye as if it were any other day. "Good luck with your presentation," I said. He nodded absently, already checking his phone, likely messaging Victoria about their upcoming date. At work, I struggled to focus, my mind constantly drifting to the evening ahead. Around 5 p.m., I received a text from Jonathan. "Got out of my meeting early. Great news to share later." His promotion. The final piece had fallen into place. I packed up my things and headed to Bella Notte, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined our story ending, but then again, neither of us was the same person who had exchanged vows 2 years ago. As I handed Antonio the final items for the table, the printed screenshots, the divorce papers, and the box containing the watch, he gave me a sympathetic nod. "Your table is ready, Mrs. Morrison. Everything is arranged as you requested." I took my seat in the corner, partially hidden by a decorative plant, and waited for my husband to arrive for his date with a woman who didn't exist. I sat at my corner table, a glass of untouched red wine before me as I watched the entrance. My heart raced each time the door opened, though I maintained a composed exterior. At precisely 6:50 p.m., Jonathan walked in, 10 minutes early for his date, a courtesy he hadn't shown me in months. He looked different somehow, his hair freshly cut, wearing the blue shirt I'd given him last Christmas that brought out his eyes. He'd even shaved the stubble he knew I liked, but had stopped maintaining, because it was too much effort. The effort was apparently worth it for Victoria. After speaking with the hostess, he was led to a specific table in the center of the restaurant, the one Antonio and I had selected. The table was elegantly set for two, with a single red rose in a vase. Jonathan looked pleased as he took his seat, checking his watch, not the one I'd given him, of course, and then his phone, no doubt looking for a message from Victoria. Antonio approached his table carrying a bottle of champagne. "Compliments of the house, sir. I understand congratulations are in order." Jonathan smiled broadly. "Thank you, but how did you know about my promotion?" Antonio merely gave a cryptic smile as he poured a single glass. "Someone thought you might be celebrating tonight." I watched as Jonathan's expression shifted from confusion to anticipation, clearly thinking Victoria had arranged this surprise. He didn't realize that the only surprise tonight would be his. After Antonio left, Jonathan noticed something on the table that hadn't been there before, a manila envelope placed discreetly beside his napkin. His brow furrowed as he picked it up, hesitating before opening it. I couldn't see his face clearly as he examined the contents, but I saw the exact moment his body tensed. His shoulders stiffened, and he frantically flipped through what I knew were dozens of screenshots. All the conversations between him and Victoria, along with evidence of his other dating profiles. He looked up sharply, scanning the restaurant. I sank deeper into my corner, not yet ready to be discovered. His phone buzzed on the table, a message from Victoria I'd scheduled to send automatically. Look underneath the envelope. With shaking hands, he lifted the manila envelope to reveal the divorce papers I'd prepared. I'd been generous in the terms, more generous than he deserved, but I wanted a clean break, not a protracted legal battle. Jonathan's face had drained of all color. He picked up his phone, presumably to message Victoria, when Antonio appeared again, this time carrying a small box wrapped in expensive paper. The final part of the evening's arrangement, sir, Antonio said, placing the box beside Jonathan. Even from my distance, I recognized the wrapping of the $5,000 watch, the one he'd never bothered to open. Attached was a small card with my handwriting. You'll need this to be on time for your court date. Jonathan ripped open the package, finally seeing the watch he'd dismissed so easily. As he held it, stunned, I stood from my table and walked slowly toward him, each step deliberate. Several diners had begun to notice the unfolding drama, but I didn't care. This moment wasn't about public humiliation. It was about facing the truth. I stopped directly in front of his table. Congratulations on your promotion, I said, my voice steady. His eyes widened in shock. Alicia? What is this? This is goodbye, Jonathan. I gestured to the papers. Everything's there. I'm not contesting anything. You wanted your freedom to start over. Now you have it. You're Victoria, he whispered, the realization dawning on him. You set this all up. No, I'm not Victoria. Victoria doesn't exist, just like the husband I thought I had. I placed my wedding ring on the table. You taught me something important, though. Sometimes what you think you want isn't what you need. Alicia, we can talk about this, he said, looking around nervously at the watching diners. You're making a scene. No, I replied calmly. I'm making an exit. There's a difference. I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him one last time. By the way, the watch is genuine, unlike your promises. Walking out of Bella Notte that night was both the hardest and most liberating moment of my life. As the cool Austin evening air hit my face, I took my first deep breath in months, perhaps in years. No more pretending. No more checking Jonathan's phone or crafting messages as Victoria. No more wondering if I could somehow save a marriage that was already dead. I drove to Kate's apartment, where I'd arranged to stay for a few days while Jonathan moved out. We'd agreed on that much through the divorce papers. He would leave our shared apartment since my name was on the lease. How did it go? Kate asked as she opened her door, concern etched on her face. Exactly as planned, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. He was completely blindsided. She led me to her couch and poured 2 glasses of wine. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My marriage had just ended in a carefully orchestrated confrontation. The future I'd planned was gone. Yet somehow I felt like I could finally see clearly again. I will be, I answered honestly. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I left the restaurant. Jonathan calling, texting, begging for a chance to explain. I switched it off and placed it face down on Kate's coffee table. You don't want to hear what he has to say? Kate asked. I shook my head. There's nothing he could say that would change anything. I gave him every opportunity to be honest, to choose our marriage. He made his choice long before tonight. Kate nodded, understanding in her eyes. What happens now? Now? I took a sip of wine, considering the blank canvas of my future. Now I rebuild. Just me. On my terms. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, unburdened by doubt and deception. The wound was fresh, but for the first time, I could envision it healing. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings, apartment hunting, and rebuilding my life piece by piece. Jonathan had moved out by the time I returned to our apartment, taking only his personal belongings. The $5,000 watch was left on the kitchen counter with a handwritten note. "I don't deserve this." At least on that, we agreed. Tina proved to be an unexpected source of strength. She recommended me for a cybersecurity project that not only doubled my income, but also rekindled my passion for work. "You've been playing detective in your personal life," she said with a wry smile. "Might as well get paid for those skills." I found a small but charming house with a garden in East Austin, something I'd always wanted but Jonathan had dismissed as too much maintenance. As I planted my first rows of vegetables and herbs, I realized how much of myself I'd compromised to fit into his vision of our life. 6 months after that night at Bella Notte, the divorce was finalized. Jonathan had attempted reconciliation several times, his messages evolving from angry accusations to desperate pleas. In his final email, he admitted that losing his promotion, apparently his company had strict policies about personal ethics, had made him realize what truly mattered. But it was too little, too late. I ran into Antonio at a farmer's market one Sunday morning. He recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Morrison," he said warmly, then caught himself. "I suppose it's Ms. Hayes again now?" I smiled. "Just Alicia is fine, and thank you again for your help that night." "Sometimes people need to face the truth directly," he replied. "I hope life has been kind to you since then." Looking around at my new reality, the basket of fresh produce in my hands, the peaceful certainty in my heart, I nodded. "Life isn't always kind," I told him. "But it's honest when we choose to be honest with ourselves." And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I'd received from the end of my marriage. The courage to face the truth, no matter how painful, and the wisdom to build a life on my own terms.